Sound Speeds. Welcome back to the Sound Speeds podcast. Remember the Geeks Rising podcast community. Let's waste no time and get right into our content. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you know that I've been talking about how tech is kind of hitting a plateau. It's not really progressing as quickly as it used to. It used to be that, for example, with action cameras, you would mount it to your forehead or on the front of a bike or a snowboard, something like that, and then go down a mountain, and it was really, really cool to see this footage. But over the course of the past few years, 4K is kind of where a lot of these technological innovations seems to kind of plateau. And what they're starting to play with now is like 10-bit picture as opposed to 8-bit. And people are doing more with LUTs and more with the horizon leveling and stuff like that. But what about sound? Well, in the old days of action cameras, sound was garbage. I didn't buy one of the very first action cameras on the market. The first one I bought was the GoPro Hero 4 Black, which was higher quality than the silver, which had a screen on the back. But now these GoPros have screens on the front and the back and their color and everything else. But with regards to sound and speakers, this was somewhat limited. Like if you look up at the very, very top, there's two little bitty lines right there you can see. And then if you look at the side over here, this is very much not waterproof. You can see little 3 lines right there. Well, those were where the speakers and the microphones were. Now, if you look at it, those are kind of big and it looks like water can very much get in there. I mean, it's not exactly waterproof, is it? Because you can see all these different openings and the serial port and stuff like that on the side. This entire thing is not waterproof. It took a few more generations before they started to become waterproof. And even with the microphone and speaker not waterproof, you would expect it to maybe sound decent. But no, audio was not a priority on cameras like this one. And now with picture kind of hitting a plateau, they have been increasing the quality of the sound on many of these action cameras in recent generations. This is a DJI Osmo Action 4, which is a better version of a GoPro kind of camera, I guess you could say, especially in recent years. Now, I want to point out a couple of things. If you look down here, you'll see a little dot next to the A and between the N and the 4. And if you look at the very, very top here, inside of this little opening right there, see all those little bitty holes in there? Those are where things like the speaker and the microphone live. And they sound so much better than they used to on the older cameras. And this is an Insta360 X5. And if you look right below the lens, there's that little bitty opening. And there's also one at the very, very top over here. There's one on the back over here. Well, actually, the one over here is this entire little area inside of there. And then there's also one at the very, very top. So on both sides, there's one. On the front, there's this one. And then on the back, there's this big super grill type thing. Now, why is it that many of these action cameras have microphones that are starting to fall into kind of this same kind of design, which is a small opening? Simply put, physics. If you have a very, very small opening, then it's going to make it more difficult for wind to blow into it, for one. If wind can blow into an opening this big very, very easily because wind can cycle through and out, it can cause a lot of damage to a microphone. The smaller you make that opening, the more difficult it's going to be for wind to blow in because there's nowhere for it to escape. So if you make a very, very tiny hole, it is going to be very easy for wind to be kind of skipped right off the surface, to be bounced right away. And if they were to recess a microphone into the hole and then add wind protection or even make it a slight angle. So that way, if the hole is like this and have the microphone come in at a little bit of a side angle at the very back as opposed to straight in, then what they can do with that is allow it to deflect a whole lot of wind. Now, in the case of the X5, they cover the entire thing inside of a little weird design there. But that is, if you look at it very, very close, it's like a fine mesh. And the purpose behind this is to create an air pocket. If you know anything about microphones and the Zeppelins and stuff like that, air pockets of stagnant air is what is best for resisting microphone wind noise from hitting a capsule. So basically, if you have a microphone and you put it inside of a big air chamber and the air inside of it does not move, then it's not going to affect the capsule. But as soon as wind blows hard enough to blow into that chamber, then it's going to be actually hitting the microphone and causing that type sound that we're familiar with. But on these kinds of action cameras, they're very, very small openings, making it more difficult for wind to blow into them. And then if they add any kind of wind protection at all, it's usually in the form of some sort of a mesh covering or even like some sort of a grill, like a very, very fine mesh. Sometimes even they'll put a microphone recessed in the background. And with the quality of microphones actually improving in recent years, the microphones are actually sounding quite a bit better than they used to. As a matter of fact, many people this day and age, like this one's in a cage, that's why it's heavy duty, and it's very much not like looking like this out of the gate. But people will take microphones on this and not even use an external microphone at all. They'll just run it straight off of this. Now you can say, well, why would it be two little bitty microphones on the very, very front? How could that sound decent? Well, if you look at something like a Countryman B6, which is a very, very tiny microphone known as the superhero microphone, very, very small opening, it is extremely good as a microphone should be when it's a pro microphone that we would put on actors in a movie. Now, those are pretty pricey, but you can get decent microphones that are a lot cheaper and that are small enough to hide inside of an action camera. And by using basically the acoustics of the recession and by engineering it to be a certain, sound that you want it to be more natural, you can actually make them sound pretty decent. Now, it requires EQ. It requires some, designing things. I'm not a microphone designer, but they have to engineer it to sound decent at the end of something like the kind of interference tube that it is in, because the microphone is at the very, very back of a tube, basically. And just like with shotgun microphones, we can make those sound good. But it's not as deep as it would be at a shotgun microphone, so you don't need to have the vent slit slots, whatever you want to call them, on the outside of the action camera itself. It's only a matter of a few millimeters deep. And so you can actually get pretty decent wide type sound, or in the case of the Insta360, each one of these basically angles out about 90 degrees, and you can go into post and figure out exactly how you want this thing to sound. You can, since it's a 360 camera, if you wanted to look that way, it's going to dial in on the two microphones and add them in such a way where it dials in on exactly that location, in very much the way that like MS sound works in stereo audio recording. But a lot of these action cameras now are using very small openings that can do two things. Number one is it can resist wind. Number two is it's not going to allow water in very easily. A very, very small opening like any one of these, water is not going to get into those holes very easily. And if it does, then it kind of deserves to be there. Most of the time, though, water is going to go right off the surface and not really stay on it. Why? Because many of the times that if they put something like these buttons on the outside, what they will do is they will make it sealed. So that way it is completely waterproof. I think you can take this one up to like a few meters in depth. And with the Insta360, same exact thing. Even though it looks like it has openings and stuff, it doesn't actually. In order to get to the access ports to charge, you have to actually open up the side or something like that, as opposed to the old school GoPro, which was very much not the case on that. And even when in more recent years, they will make these things so that way you actually have to slide and push things open in order to actually access the micro SD card or to charge them or something like that. So you actually have the ability to get things like decent sound with it being waterproof, mainly because the membranes and stuff that they're using on these action cameras can be very, very fine. They can be waterproof, and then combination of physics and the membrane itself, making sure that sound can actually go through it. Because as with most things, as long as you know the way it's supposed to sound, you can tweak the engineering behind it to make it basically sound the way you want it to. So if there's a membrane and it's like, wow, that sounds really muffled. Well, maybe if we made it a little thinner, maybe if we changed the design up a little bit, maybe if we made it so the microphone capsule was closer to it, maybe even touching, maybe just cover the capsule with a different type of membrane and see if that works. All these different design things they can change in order to see if that improves the sound. So that is a little bit about microphones on action cameras and how they're going to resist things like wind and water. So going forward, I'm only going to be answering one question or discussing one topic in each episode of the Sound Speeds podcast. Why? Because I'm not being asked a lot of questions. And so they're coming off of my mind. And most of the time, I'm having a hard time coming up with multiple topics to discuss in these podcasts. So that's the God's honest truth of it. So anyway, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Sound Speeds podcast. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks with yet another episode. Have a question you'd like answered or want to add something? Be sure to write it in the comment section down below. You can also make a suggestion for future topics of discussion. Again, comment section down below, or you can email me at soundspeeds@yahoo.com. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss out on future sound advice.